Okay, I'll be honest with all of you. I have been sitting here for 5 minutes trying to come up with a joke to start off this review, but there was just so much going on in this movie in the best possible way that I could not pick one thing to just riff off of and joke about because, to be honest with all of you, I have literally just gotten back from the movie theater. Like, I drove from the movie theater, got home, turned on my camera, sat down, and am now speaking to all of you after having watched this movie. And for those of you who don't know, if you didn't know by clicking on the thumbnail, this is my review of Spider-Man No Way Home. And I have been so pumped to see this movie, and I've been so anxious trying to avoid spoilers because, for those of you who don't know, I'm recording this on this Sunday after this movie came out. So for Friday and Saturday, I just had to avoid all spoilers because Friday night I had an improv show I was in, Saturday night I had a Christmas party, so I'm just like, oh god, please no one ruin this movie for me. And I'm so glad that I didn't because this movie was pure joy front to back. And while I have a couple nitpicks here and there, this was a truly fantastic piece of work. And, I'm gonna have to sit with it a little bit. I don't think it is my favorite Spider-Man movie of all time. I still think that's going to be Into the Spider-Verse for me, but it is definitely in the top 3, and I think this was just absolutely fantastic. Now, before I get into this, there is a lot that I am going to want to rant about, but because this movie was so big, I'm sure there's going to be things that I missed, so please be aware that I'm going to miss something that you want me to talk about. And secondly, I am going to go full into spoilers because the things that I want to rant about, the things that I am so excited and pumped about this movie for, I'm just so excited that they did, and also I'm shocked that they did in a lot of ways as well. I will have to go full into spoilers to talk about, so just know that going in, and there's plenty of spoiler-free reviews that have gone on for the past few days that I'm sure you could check up on, but if you want my spoiler-free thoughts, we're just going to go right into it because holy heck, this was just packed full of so many amazing appearances, cameos, surprises, things that a lot of us probably predicted, like the appearance of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield appearing as Spider-Man in this movie, as well as all the villains, and Willem Dafoe, for me, being one of the standouts, and also Alfred Molina as well as Electro. He was also great as well. That's one thing that I'll touch upon here too, but what I really loved this movie for was, despite the fact that there was just so much going on, there were so many characters that they brought into this and gave time to and gave focus to, including all these characters that we've had from all these other Spider-Man movies, including other MCU characters like Doctor Strange. Despite all of that, this movie was emotionally impactful and gut-punching, and in a surprising way, extremely understated. That's the thing that I want to kind of start off here, because this movie could be so over the top. It could have been so grand and big, and yet so much of it felt real and surprisingly raw for a superhero movie. For an MCU movie, MCU movies I'm used to being poppy, over the top, big, grand, eye-catching, big poppy colors, and that's certainly here. But the moments that hit me most throughout this film are the ones that were just smaller in scale, and the camera just lingered on our actors, just really showing us the gut punch that we got to see here. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but I think that that's just a thing for this entire movie, that despite everything, it is surprisingly an understated film in a lot of ways, and I think that that is what lends its bigger moments its absolute power. But let's rewind a little bit and go back to the beginning, because what I loved the start of this movie for was when I saw the trailers for this film that Peter Parker was going to use Doctor Strange to try and erase everyone from remembering that he was Peter Parker. I was a little bit frustrated by that because it felt like a little bit too quick, a little bit too easy of a solution, and a little bit too like, oh yeah, we'll just do this and it'll fix everything and it'll cause like this huge crack in time sort of thing. But what the opening 30 minutes or so of this movie does is it really sells you on why Peter would be that desperate. I thought it was just going to be like, hey, a lot of media stuff, a lot of things like that were getting on his nerves and things like that. But the moment that made this work the most for me was when it wasn't about Peter choosing to do this for himself, because he was willing to take that on, but when MJ and Ned both got not accepted to MIT because they knew him, and it was explicitly stated. So him wanting to do this spell with Doctor Strange came out of an altruistic desire, not a selfish one. And I think that that is so core Spider-Man, and that subtle distinction and way that they shifted that, I think, was absolutely amazing. And also showed us in this opening bit the sudden persistence of all of this. The fact that it just really just permeates his entire life, from his relationships with his teachers, which was a great funny sequence where we got Hannibal Buress being like, Mysterio's right and being a conspiracy theorist guy, which surprisingly, I mean, it's not like overtly didactic and political, but a lot of surprisingly like digs into politics throughout this movie. Like we have J. Jonah Jameson being a clear Alex Jones reference, with making it very explicit that he's an Alex Jones reference, with him selling like the supplement stuff. So I was like, dang, all right, MCU just hitting it. I'm here for that. I am here for that. But it just sold all of that like persistence just on him, and the fact that he has to move into Happy's home, and Happy was he was a little bit of a sad sack in this movie, but I appreciated that. Also, a small note too, I like the fact that we see Happy wearing a CPAP machine, and it wasn't like the joke was that he was wearing a CPAP machine, because my mother uses a CPAP machine. I was like, oh, that's kind of nice. I think that feels real, and I kind of enjoyed seeing that, just like subtle little representation there of kind of normalizing that, and I thought that was nice. Also, seeing Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, officially confirming that he is Daredevil in this universe, was really, really cool. It also made sense to see him in the lawyer role here, and then him catching the brick as almost the same time as Peter was truly wonderful, and I just like the subtle references to him being Daredevil, and I was kind of hoping we get to see him on the full Daredevil suit later on, but it is at least nice to know that he is in this MCU proper, and I'm excited to see him in hopefully future projects and maybe even his own movie. The other thing that the opening few minutes just really sold me on just a bunch was how all of that stuff, if Peter really paid attention, was irrelevant, because Ned and MJ were there for him, and that relationship between those three just carries throughout this entire film, and really, despite everything going on, just continually is the backbone of it. Because when we do get to the moment where, the cracks in the multiverse come through and we have all these different spider villains coming in, there's that moment where MJ just says, like, next time consult with us, but we're here for you, we got you. And it's not this contrived, I don't want to say contrived, because it would have made sense that she would have been upset, but it's a dynamic that we've seen so much. And similar to Hawkeye, with Hawkeye and his family dynamic, which is kind of subverting the trope, and his family's being just incredibly supportive and understanding of his life as a superhero in that TV show, we're getting a similar vibe here, where everyone's just like, look, we get that mistakes are made, but we're here for you, we're going to support you, and we're not going to harp on it too much. Just do better in the future, and we move on from it. I just like that just sort of movement of on to the next beat. The other thing, too, that I also really liked was the explanation of why only these villains were coming into the multiverse, because, it could have been easy, like, well, we cracked the multiverse. Why is it only Spider-Man people coming in? Well, the way that the spell works is that it's only people that knew that Peter Parker was Peter, and of course, thinking about it, like, all these villains knew that Peter was Peter in their own respective movie, so that made like perfect sense to me. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. The other thing too that I really enjoyed was that all of the villains, we get to meet the villains first before we get, Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. And because of that, because we get moments with all of them, the movie, while it is very intertextual, while it is very much playing off of our prior nostalgia and knowledge of these villains in their own films, this movie does enough, I think, for people who may not have seen those Spider-Man movies, like younger folks who aren't of my generation, probably a little bit younger than me, who haven't seen those films, to get enough of each villain to know what's going on with them. And you get a lot with Alfred Molina's Doc Ock as well, to like understand that he kind of was a great scientist, and he sort of fell from grace, and he was being mind controlled. The little references to we, as we saw in those movies. And we also get to sense that Sandman is actually a good guy. Flint is actually a good guy, because he tries to help Peter when he runs into Electro at the beginning of the movie. We also get Electro sort of having moments of not wanting to be seen by the characters around them. I think all of that was great, but I think the most heartbreaking one, and the one I was most excited to see, and I think most of us were most excited to see, was Norman Osborn, Willem Dafoe, back in the role, and he nails it. The moments where he is just playing Norman, this broken man from that movie, when he goes to visit Aunt May at Feast, was just, wow. I was like, dang, this man, we all knew Willem Dafoe can act. If you've seen The Lighthouse, you know the man can act, and just the myriad of other films that he's been in, like Florida Project and stuff like that. But it just, those moments were just, he nailed it. He nailed it every single time. And I was just surprised. Again, understated moments, like the just sadness of him being at Feast with Aunt May, just like stealing the donuts and just kind of being lost and alone and saying, like, someone's living in my house, and you just felt it. Again, the understated moments with these characters were just fantastic. I also loved that we did get the return of the meme when Willem Dafoe says, I'm something of a scientist myself, before we move too much further into the film. The only thing that I'm mildly frustrated on is just a little bit into the conceit of how this multiverse happened. Well, I buy that Peter would have done this, that this is something that he would have asked. I actually put a lot of the blame on Doctor Strange here, because I feel like, again, Doctor Strange, a little bit of an impulsive guy, as we know, but I feel like he would have asked, like, okay, before we do this spell, is there anyone that you want to, because because it is possible for me to change the spell so a couple people remember. I mean, obviously we want the Avengers to remember you, right? We'll make sure to put that in the spell there too. Anyone else maybe that you want to have remember you in the spell, and Peter then saying it before they're in the middle of like this high stakes spell going on? I think that was a little bit frustrating to me. I was like, come on, that conversation I feel must have happened. So it was a little bit contrived in that moment to get us there, but I'm willing to forgive it given the wonderfulness that was the rest of the movie. But that was a little bit like, okay. That's like pretty much my only minor note throughout this whole thing. Just a little bit of contrivance that I feel like would have been actually fixed if this had really taken place. But as we get further into the film, as we collect all of our villains here, and Doctor Strange says, all right, I'm going to send them back. And then we get the choice by Peter to say, no, I'm not going to send them back because we learned that they all died. Which, again, like I'm thinking here, I'm like, I guess, yeah, they do. Besides Sandman, I guess all of these characters do die in their own respective universes. And so I was like, kind of like, wow, a lot of villains get murdered by Spider-Man in the different movies. And so I thought that was all really, really wonderful. That the rest of this movie, despite the fact that this was all instigated by Peter being a little bit impulsive, the rest of the movie was instigated by his desire to try to save everyone, which is, again, a very selfless Spider-Man thing, and it cost him everything. And while he does blame himself later on in the movie for Aunt May's death, as we'll talk about in a second, and I could understand how he got there, the reason that she died was because he made the right choice. Because he chose not to send them back, but to secure them and save their lives. Not because he made the impulsive choice to return, to try to make everyone forget, but because he chose to save them. That's the reason that Aunt May died. And yes, there are other reasons like Willem Dafoe's, like Norman Osborn getting her killed. So he's more of a directly responsible than anyone else, obviously. And Doctor Strange should have been more careful with the spell. But the choice was because Peter did the right thing. And I like that makes sense that Peter would feel guilt for that. But it also makes sense for Spider-Man. It is a heroic choice. And I think that was just, again, subtle gradations of the character that made the emotional context work, but also still showed us that Peter is a good person and a hero at heart. Even further, the moments where we get Peter trying to cure everyone by himself at his apartment, all really wonderful too. The moments where Alfred Molina gets cured and he suddenly remembers that he is, who he was, and he turns and becomes a good guy again, just reminded us like the heart and depth to his character and how tragic he was in Spider-Man 2. The turn of Norman Osborn as well was heartbreaking too, and creepy as all hell. Like we knew it was coming. We all knew that Green Goblin was going to come out again, but the moment where that turn happens, and he just has that spider sense going throughout here was creepy, was legitimately creepy. And the other moments, like with Electro and Sandman connecting and Lizard kind of being like, yes, this is the moment, was all just, again, surprisingly understated and given surprising depth to these villains. I mean, Electro, for all the faults of Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I actually don't hate Amazing Spider-Man 2, it's a bit of a mess as they were trying to set up all these other things. I think it was just trying to do too much too quickly in that movie. The moments that did work, I think, were like Electro's characterization. I thought was decently done in that film, and they're paying it off here with Jamie Foxx doing an amazing job throughout. And so all of that was great. But again, going back to these moments that just hit hard and were surprisingly understated in such an action-packed movie, the moment when Aunt May died. And she finally delivers that with great power comes great responsibility line. And then you realize what's about to happen. Because I thought she was fine too. And then you realize that she's about to die. And it kills you. My heart just hit in that moment. And I don't think I've ever had that much emotion at an MCU movie. I mean, I love the MCU movies. And there's been some, surprisingly gut-punchy moments, but that hit. And then the next moment that hit, going back to that relationship between our three main characters, was when they find Peter after we meet the other Peter Parkers, which I'll talk about in a second. But when MJ and Ned find him again, and they just hug. And there's just a minute-long sequence where they just hug. I will say, a tear came to my eye. That surprisingly hit me. But the next best bit that was just a lot of fun was when we get Andrew Garfield and we get Tobey Maguire coming back. Like, I love seeing Andrew Garfield coming when he took off the hood, and that whole bit with him being like, should I go? And it's like, why do I have to crawl around? All of that was really, really funny. And by the way, Zendaya, fantastic as MJ, just fantastic throughout this film, selling again that support of Peter, but also being like her sarcastic self and just selling this version of MJ. And she has fantastic chemistry with Peter as well. But all of that was just a lot of fun. The moment that hit me was Tobey Maguire. I mean, Tobey Maguire was my Spider-Man. His first, I still remember to this day, walking out of that first Spider-Man movie and being so excited, being like, oh, I want to see the next one, and not knowing how movies work. And then someone told me, he's like, he signed on for 3 Spider-Man movies. Just as we were coming out of the cars, they saw this like young kid being so pumped for the movie, and I'm like, yes, I want to go see it tomorrow. It was adorable. It was one of my first moments at the cinema that was just like sold me on the power of movies and nerddom and comics. And so seeing him back was just wonderful. A lot older, definitely a lot older. But it just worked really, really well. And then when they go and meet up with our Peter Parker of the MCU right now, just that whole sequence was also impactful with, Toby saying that, hey, I lost my Uncle Ben. And we also had Andrew Garfield saying, I lost Gwen Stacy. Setting up their arcs in just a few moments, because Peter, again, what I love about this movie is it reminds us of the fans of what's important for these emotional arcs for these characters. If people who have seen these older movies, but people who haven't seen this movie, they give you just enough. Like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, you know that he murdered the guy who he thought killed Uncle Ben in Spider-Man 1. That's all you need to know for the emotional beat later on in the movie. Andrew Garfield, he lost Gwen Stacy for an emotional beat later on in the movie, but also paying off those characters' arcs from their own universes and getting us fans who loved these versions of these characters a little bit more to build upon and say like, hey, these characters had lives after the end of their movies. I especially loved learning more about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, learning that he became rageful, because obviously The Amazing Spider-Man 2 ended where it did. We never got more of those films, for better or for worse, and it's a little bit disappointing that we don't know what happened to his character, and so we got a little bit of a hint of that he became rageful and that he's something he wanted to make up for going on into the future. And so I liked seeing all of that, and so I just like these like little seedings of mini arcs that they were able to use these pre-established characters for, and I think that they just paid it off, like set up, paid off fantastically here. Going further, the whole bit with the 3 Spider-Men just sort of working off of each other, bouncing off each other, the bits with like Toby saying like, oh, the spider webbing is from my wrist, I don't make the webbing, was hilarious, and all of them asking him about that was fantastic, and I really enjoyed just all of those beats. I don't want to go through all the comedy, but I was laughing my butt off the entire time. But then they go to the Statue of Liberty, which is getting a Captain America shield, evidently. So further differentiating our universe from the MCU. But this whole action sequence was just so much fun, battling different villains. The fact that they're not working together, I love some jokes that were going in the background, like when Tom Holland Spider-Man shoots his webbing and accidentally knocks Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man off, and them also saying to Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, it's like, no, you're amazing. Don't let anyone get to it, and just repeating like, you're the amazing Spider-Man. We get it. Haha. Very funny. And then Peter saying like, hey, we need to work as a team. What distinguishes me as a Spider-Man is I've been part of a team, unlike you two. And so he is able to get them to work together. I thought also really worked as well. And then everyone getting cured throughout all of these moments was wonderful. Alfred Molina, Doc Ock coming in at the last moment to save them and actually turning out to still be a good guy, I thought was a nice subversion and payoff of all of that in those final moments. One thing I actually didn't even realize, like I was kind of thinking throughout the movies, like, oh, I guess Lizard and Sandman aren't played by the original actors, but I wasn't entirely sure because they were so well done and voiced, especially Flint. Like I did not tell that wasn't the original actor in the role. And the only thing that clued me in was that they just stayed CGI the entire movie. And so I was like, yeah, it's probably not the original actor, but I didn't check because I intentionally tried to avoid spoiler cameo stuff, so I didn't look up the IMDb actor credit list before going into the film. So I just sort of was trying to avoid seeing who would show up and who wouldn't. And so I was like, oh, it's probably not the original actors. And the only thing that cued me in was when both Lizard and Sandman were cured at the end. That was clearly stock footage from those movies and integrated pretty well. But obviously once they were cured, they were like, all right, and we're not gonna really see you anymore after this point. But it worked well enough to at least bring them into the film. And I didn't really notice or care until those final stock footage moments. And again, if you hadn't seen those movies or weren't as familiar with them as I am, for example, you probably wouldn't even notice the stock footage use there because it was just fairly well integrated. And so I thought that, again, a good job by the CGI team and just creative choices behind the scenes there. But the moments that hit me at the end of this film too, because right at the end of this movie, once Green Goblin shows up and starts attacking, I was like, okay, we just had this big CGI fight. How are you going to do this even better with just Green Goblin? Again, love Norman Osborn, but you can't beat like this big fight with just one dude and tell me that 3 Spider-Man are going to beat him, or not beat him, as it were. And I like that it came down to emotional core moments. You have MJ almost getting killed and falling, and when Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man saves her, I gotta say, I teared up. It was, again, an understated moment. And certainly it relied on intertextuality. It relied on you having seen Gwen Stacy's death in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But when Andrew Garfield saves her and catches her, and you just see his eyes wells up that he managed to save her, it didn't explicitly call it out. It wasn't like Andrew's like, I saved you like I didn't save Gwen. It was just a moment. And if you knew those films, then it like just hit you hard. And if you didn't, it was fine. But it hit me. And I teared up at that moment. And then again, another tearing up moment where Peter is just wailing on Norman Osborn and about to murder him, and he takes the glider and is about to stab him the same way he died the original time, and then Toby comes in and stops him. And again, in an understated way, there's no words, not a single word spoken, and it's just the two men staring at each other, and you get everything. You get what Toby is trying to tell him. This is not what we do. I've done this. I've been there. I know what you're feeling. Don't do this, because you will regret it. And Tom Holland, Spider-Man, doesn't. And he manages to cure Norman in that moment after stabbing Toby, which I was like, oh no, you better not kill my Toby. But it was just great. It was absolutely great. And again, for a franchise known for quips and yelling and screaming and saying things like really fast and really quickly and making you laugh every single moment, just having a moment with no dialogue and telling us everything just based off of the actors and our existing knowledge, both in the film and out of it, of these characters' arcs. Fantastic job. Truly fantastic job. I know I've said that a billion times. Amazing job, I should say. But it really works. And then the heartbreaking moment where Peter chooses with Doctor Strange to let everyone forget who he was, and the heartbreaking choice that it is, but again, a very selfless Spider-Man thing to do, worked wonders. And him saying goodbye and him just like whispering, I love you at the end, again, no dialogue, she just mouths it, it hit me. Again, another impactful moment, and one that feels like this movie has weight. Because what I worry about going into this movie was that this movie would end with the status quo being reset to where we were at basically at the end of Far From Home, where he gets to be Spider-Man, he has MJ and everyone remember who he is, but no one else remembers, and we're sort of back at the normal Spider-Man status quo. But no, this movie still has weight going forward because no one remembers that he's Spider-Man. And the heartbreaking moments with him going to see MJ and him just not telling her and getting those final moments was great. And the last moment with Happy, where Happy doesn't even remember him, but he says, even when people are gone, the people that they saved get to live on. And he's not only talking about Aunt May, but he's talking about himself. And I think that resonance there, that he came to terms with the fact that I may not be remembered, but I saved people's lives. Not only these people, but the villains that I met. I think that was great. Just truly great. And I'm curious to see what they do with Spider-Man going forward in the MCU from this moment, because they have a completely clean board with him. Hopefully we get more Tom Holland Spider-Man. I would be shocked if we didn't, given how popular this movie was, and I'm sure they're going to want to sign him up for a contract. I think it's probably just on Tom at this moment if he wants to be the Spider-Man anymore or not. But given he's in the Uncharted films, I'm sure he has a good relationship with Sony and wants to stay in the MCU, I'm sure. So I'm sure we'll probably see more, but who knows? We'll see going into it. But if this is the ending for his character, I wouldn't be sad about it. Or at least I would be melancholic about it in the best possible way. And but I hope we do get to see more. I'm curious to see if we do get to see more where that is going forward into the next few movies. And I should also quick little speak about the after credit sequence. The after credit sequence with Venom, with Tom Hardy's Venom, Eddie Brock at the bar, sort of like learning about the MCU, and then immediately getting sent back. Like, we were all so pumped after Venom 2's like, oh my gosh, he's in Spider-Man No Way Home, and he's gonna be in the MCU now, and then he just gets sent back. Oh, I'm gonna choke on my hair there with how funny. I thought that was great. It's just like subverting the expectation almost instantly. And I do like there is some lasting consequences, because Venom does, a little piece of Venom gets to stay in our universe, probably setting up for Tom Holland to get the Venom suit at some point. So I like that. But I was just kind of like, that's great that he just shows up, learns about the MCU, and is like, all right, I'm out. Disappears back. Wonderful. I was a little bit disappointed at the end after credit sequence, which was just a trailer for Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness. It was just a trailer. we're probably gonna get that same trailer posted online as the official trailer. So it was like, it didn't tell us much that we didn't already know, that this fallout from this movie will lead into the Multiverse Madness. We're getting Wanda. Nice to see a little reference to WandaVision in there with Westview. So nice to know that there is going to be some crossover, explicit mentions between the TV shows and the movies like that. But ultimately, it was just like, okay, it's just a trailer telling us stuff we knew and giving us a little piece of information. I would have much preferred a one-off scene as opposed to like, oh, getting to see all these cool things and essentially just getting to see a trailer. But what are you gonna do? It didn't knock my socks off, but it was like, okay, fine. I guess you got to sell your movies, I guess. And you're just making it explicit that it's a trailer instead of it being a fun little after credits scene. It felt a little bit lazy to me, but there you go. One thing, though, that I will say that I was excited about with the after credits trailer for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was the surprise hit at the end of the trailer that the major villain of the movie was not going to be Wanda, as many of us suspected, but apparently either something that looks very much like or is the evil Doctor Strange from What If, making What If actually be one of the first MCU Disney Plus shows to have an actual impact on the MCU proper, which, considering how I thought that was going to be the one with the least impact, I am actually shocked by. So really cool to see that little cameo surprise there. Maybe it's a different Doctor Strange, maybe it's not the one from What If, but it would be kind of cool if it was, and I really hope that that is the case. But at the end of the day, besides that little disappointment at the end and a little bit of waffling with the contrivance of how this, like a little bit of contrivance with the fact that Doctor Strange didn't have the conversation beforehand, beyond those two nitpicks, this was a fantastic film. One of the biggest, most crazy, bonkers MCU movie that we've gotten, right up there with Endgame, and yet at the same time, like Endgame, actually, similarly, because the first hour of Endgame was like this as well, surprisingly understated. Surprisingly not as MCU over the top as you would expect it to be. And for that, it makes it surprisingly impactful despite all the nonsense that is going on in here, and not only paying off the arc of this movie and focusing on that as it rightfully should, but also giving us a little bit more payoff for Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire's Spider-Mans for us fans, and even things like Norman Osborn and Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. It was just, they balanced everything perfectly. It could have been so easy to fall into fan service or to ignore our main character's arcs or whatever, but the balance struck between all of these things, perfect. Fantastic movie. Again, I don't know if it's my favorite Spider-Man movie that I've ever seen. It's definitely in my top 3. It'd probably be right up there with Into the Spider-Verse and the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man. I like Spider-Man 2, but the original one is my personal favorite. Again, probably for nostalgia reasons, as I said before. But it's definitely up there in the top 3. So, great job. But I'd love to hear all your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you love this movie? Did you hate this movie? I'd love to hear all of that. Don't forget to have my Patreon as well. I also have my Sex and Star Trek video that came out on my main channel just a few days ago. Still very proud of it. Still hoping it will go strong. If you leave a comment on that, I'd be greatly appreciative. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. And as always, live long and prosper.